No, I think you got something there. I'm going to take that a little further. The early days of this show, we went down the rabbit hole of psychedelics. I had people like Graham Hancock on. We were on the Joe Rogan Experience, who was talking about ayahuasca. I had some ceremonies here. And I got to go revisit ayahuasca back in 2018 with Dennis McKenna. Actually, we went down to Costa Rica and I had a few ceremonies. And Dennis is Terrence's brother, who was one of the great bards back in the day, talking about all of these concepts, paradigm shifts, and he had a poetic way that he spoke. I highly recommend everybody go listen to those tapes. And one thing that just hit me when you were talking about that is that both Dennis and Terrence, they always say that the beautiful thing about the medicine is that you have a direct relationship with it. There's not a professor trying to get in the way. There's not like a cult leader. There's not a religious leader that are trying to get in the way of you and your truth in what they're trying to say. So they always say, I'm not trying to tell you what's going to happen to you or how to interpret it or what to do with it. It's your relationship with the medicine. And in a way, Robert, maybe that's what Bitcoin is. You finally, for maybe one of the first times in your life, and maybe the pirates had it too, but maybe not, is that maybe you're having a real relationship with money and it's not gone through a filter of a government, a central bank, or someone who can manipulate it or tell you a story about it. And maybe for the first time, you're feeling what it's like, to actually have a value layer that you can exchange. And perhaps maybe that's why it is strangely psychedelic and maybe personal, some of these journeys. I don't know. Do I have something there? It's the first time I've ever talked about that.
Oh, I think you do. And it's something I've touched on in a lot of my work. I mentioned this earlier that I've come to view money as like the base layer property protocol of human action, or you might say the prime mover of human action. So the character of that base layer becomes reflected in our own character, right? There's this reciprocity. And this gets back, there's a long history of this discussion too, of the mutual interaction between the creator and the created, right? I think Churchill said something like, the buildings we make in turn make us, right? And you could possibly extend that to tools as well, that again, the actions we carry out day to day, and that becomes imprinted in us as procedural knowledge. And we often think that like everything comes out of the head, but there's a lot of intelligence in the body, right? Like I don't know if you ever noticed this, but when you're punching in like a key code to your debit card or whatever, you don't think through the numbers every time, right? Like, especially if you've done it a few times, there's just this intelligence in your hand or arm that just whips out a pattern real quick. So and I've talked to some cognitive scientists about this. That's what consciousness is doing, actually. It's the aperture of conscious awareness that's trying to embed these things in procedural knowing so we don't have to think about them, which is the same thing a social institute doing, by the way. Again, in that macro scale mode network, create these institutions as cognitive expedients. So we don't need to think about every action we're doing, especially if we're doing it repetitively. We want to economize it, clearly. And this gets to this old Alfred North Whitehead quote that I'll roughly paraphrase, but he said, it's conventional wisdom to say that we should think before we act, but civilization advances by the opposite, actually, that we advance based on the number of important operations we can carry out without having to think about them. Right? This is how we're economizing human action. That's the whole point here. So there is a deep connection there. And I like that this idea of having a direct relationship with the medicine. I think it was also McKenna that said all language is a lie.
Yeah.
We're using these little pieces of artwork to kind of point towards the truth that is itself ineffable. We can't describe it. And maybe Bitcoin, there's something there, that we've approximated sovereignty across history, and it's been decentralizing over time. This is important too, that, in ancient Egypt, you had the sovereign pharaohs and everyone else was a subject pretty much. And then as we've progressed our governance systems across time, we now have something like representative democracy, which is the voter is at least much more sovereign than the subjects were under the ancient pharaohs. So sovereignty has been decentralizing over time. And maybe that's what Bitcoin is the greatest decentralization of sovereignty we've ever had. Because now you as an individual can have inviolable property, right? And this is the crux of it. is that you now have a property right that's independent of the monopoly on violence, can't be confiscated, can't be manipulated, can't be inflated, which we haven't talked about yet, but those are some things that Bitcoin does.